Right, good evening and welcome to APM South Wales and West of England branch event of the planning of major infrastructure repairs, and we're looking particularly at the Tamar Bridge tonight. My name is Julian Harris. I'm a branch committee member of the South Wales and West of England branch, and I jointly look after Cornwall, Devon and Somerset with a couple of colleagues. And this evening, we're very pleased to welcome Richard Cole, who's the engineering manager for Tamar Crossings. And in his current role, he has overall responsibility for managing engineering, construction, maintenance and inspection functions at both the Tamar Bridge and the associated shore facilities of the Torpoint ferries. So this particular event is suitable for professionals with any level of experience. One thing I will draw your attention to is there's evaluation sheets. If you look down in the corner of the webinar thing, I think there's a SurveyMonkey link there. We would really like you to fill these in. We do read them, and any comments you may have, good, bad or indifferent, we will read them and we will hopefully not too bad, but we will try and learn from them and do better in the future if necessary. In terms of questions, there's a chat function on the site, and Rob Allen, who is working in the background there, will put these to the speaker in the Q&A session. So please be aware that this webinar is being recorded and you will be in a listen-only mode, and the session will last for approximately 60 minutes, consisting of around about 30 minutes, 45 minutes of knowledge share, and conclude with a question and answer session. Following the webinar, the recording will be uploaded onto the APM YouTube account and the slides will be published on the SlideShare account within a few days. And this session will also count towards CPD. Right, little bit of parish notices for our particular branch. We're starting also now to plan for physical events. So know that we're hopefully coming to I won't say the end of COVID, but coming out of the more restrictions that we've been placed under. We're starting to plan for physical events and we'll see how they're received. In the meantime, there will be a number of evening webinars continuing. A reminder of the excellent resources on the APM website, which includes APM Hub, which is a member discussion forum, information about how to develop into a chartered project professional. There's excellent guidance documents available, and so far there's been 2,100 successful chartered project professionals to date. Forthcoming branch events. This is for South Wales and West of England, but if you look on the APM website, there's events all across the country. 24th of February, Agile, is it worth the risk? 16th of March, Natural Resources Wales. This is from audit to assurance. Now this is a physical event and it's going to be held at the Aztec West facility in Bristol. 30th of March, we've got a virtual networking event, which is hosted by Nina Hartley, who is my colleague who looks after Cornwall, Devon and Somerset. And the topic is around International Women's Day, which is on the 8th of March. Early April, we're looking for a one-day seminar on how to kick your project off on the right track. And that's a physical event at Bower, Bristol, which is near the British Aerospace facility. 27th of April, there's a BCAG, Branch Corporate Advisory Group meeting. This is for higher education institutes and corporate members. And then on the 9th of June, there's a joint event with Midland Branch at Cheltenham, and it's to do with mental well-being. So we're looking to host more webinar events for members until we're able to go completely over to the physical side again, because we're all missing the chance to meet our members. It really means a lot to interact face to face with people. We also put on a pretty damn good buffet for our physical dues, so that's another reason to keep them in mind. So we are going to continue to plan for some virtual events as well, and these offer the advantage of greater accessibility at the time. So I'm now going to have the pleasure of introducing our speaker. As I said, his name is Richard Cole, and he is the engineering manager of Tamar Crossings. And Richard will be talking about the upkeep of the Tamar Bridge, which recently needed significant repairs, and this needed to be undertaken during a period of peak use. The planning and management of such works needs to be carefully undertaken to minimise the impact on the public and local businesses whilst achieving the full scope of the project in the required timeframe. Richard, over to you.
Great, thanks very much. Thanks for the introduction. Yeah, it would absolutely be much better to be doing this in person where we can see people's faces and interact. But as it is, this is the way it'll happen. I'm still not quite used to talking to a screen, so apologies if I come across a little bit wooden. It's not quite a natural thing to do even after 2 years. Anyway, so let's get on with the presentation. And as Julian's already said, I'm going to be talking a bit about planning major infrastructure repairs on the bridge. I'm going to focus on the resurfacing project particularly, but this really applies to all of the work we do and all of the projects that we're involved with at the bridge. I'm going to give a brief introduction about who we are. The nice thing about people attending virtually is you're probably stretched across the country. So for those who don't know where we are, we're in the southwest of England, on the outskirts of Plymouth, right on the Devon and Cornwall border. The bridge is on the upper reaches of the Tamar, runs between Saltash and Plymouth, and forms part of the A38. And then the Torpoint ferry is further south and links very nearly the city centre of Plymouth with southeast Cornwall. Both really important crossings of the river locally. The next nearest crossing is probably 6 or 7 miles upstream, which is a 14th or 15th century stone bridge. Can't really take HGVs or the volume of traffic that the A38 or Torpoint ferry can. So locally, very important crossings. There's some statistics. Tamar Bridge will take about 16 million vehicles a year. Income from tolls, and we'll talk about that in a minute, is nearly 10 million. Torpoint ferry, about 2.3 million vehicles with thousands of foot passengers and cyclists, and revenue is about 1.2 million a year. We believe the Torpoint ferry is well, certainly the busiest inland waterway in the UK, potentially in the world. We haven't tested that, but it's certainly a very busy inland waterway. Other income is around about 1.1 million. Now, we're a bit of an unusual beast, really. We are Tamar Crossings, that's what we're known as locally, although we are actually the Tamar Bridge and Torpoint Ferry Joint Committee. That just doesn't quite roll off the tongue as well as Tamar Crossings. We're established under primary legislation, that's an Act of Parliament. The original Tamar Bridge Act was 1957, various changes to that, the latest being 1998, when the bridge was strengthened and widened, and that strengthening and widening scheme required an Act of Parliament to implement. Now, originally the 1957 Act required the creation of the Joint Committee, and central government essentially wouldn't fund the crossing at the time. So the two local authorities, Plymouth City Council and Cornwall County Council, as it was then, sponsored the bridge, got the Act through Parliament, and that Act required the formation of the Joint Committee to operate the new Tamar Bridge, and it also at that point in time took the Torpoint ferry into ownership, which before was wholly owned by Cornwall Council. So we're primarily self-funded from toll income. Just going back to the previous slide, there was a little bit of extra income there. That comes from various way leaves and a very small contribution from Highways England for operating part of their network. The income is ring fenced for the operation, maintenance and improvement of the crossings, and those three words are really important, and we'll touch on those in a short while. And it's also worth noting that the ferry operation is heavily subsidised from bridge income, much more expensive to run, but doesn't have the same volume of traffic. Every organisation these days needs a mission statement, and ours is to provide the travelling public with safe, reliable and efficient crossings of the Tamar. And in order to do that, we have a business plan, and that sets out the strategic direction of the organisation. and we achieve our mission through the operation, maintenance and improvement of the crossings. And those three words are actually in the Act of Parliament. So if the money we want to spend doesn't relate to operation, maintenance and improvement, we can't spend it. So they are the three key words, three key things we can only spend our money on. So we can't contribute to social care, housing, or NHS, anything like that. Our toll income is purely ring fenced for the crossings. As I said, we're a slightly odd organisation. Our board of directors, if you like, they comprise 5 elected politicians from each of the parent authorities. They're elected members. That brings its own challenges. Each parent authority elects a joint chairman, and together they run the joint committee. We employ 113 staff directly and about 20 odd contracted staff. And the contracted staff are essentially the toll collectors who work at the Tamar Bridge in the toll booths. Toll collection at the ferry is run in-house. We're largely independent from the two authorities, but we do get some corporate support from both Cornwall and Plymouth, but it is quite limited. We also operate 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, including Christmas Day. So there are other challenges that come with that as well. Annual income for 2019-20 is nearly 12 million, and we spend around about 10 million pounds on a range of things. So this is where we get our income from. Bridge tolls is around about 80% of our income, ferry tolls 11, and then other, that comes from way leaves and other payments from Highways England. And this is where the spend goes. So our nearly 10 million pounds, not surprisingly, with 100 and so odd employees, 48% of that is on salaries. Maintenance forms a significant part of our costs as well. And then the other 15% goes on operations, admin, and some other costs. Up until early 2000s, we weren't actually allowed to borrow to spend. So anything we wanted to improve or maintain, any projects, we had to save, and the only way to save that was from the toll income. In 2000, that changed, and we were then able to borrow for investment. So now that's what we do. So for the resurfacing project, for instance, that's capital spend, and that gets borrowed and that gets paid back, much like your own personal mortgages. And we have to allow for that within our within our spend every year. And our current debt is approximately 37 million pounds. So a bit about the history of the bridge. We're not going to talk too much about the ferry tonight. Built between 1959 and 1961, designed by M.I.C.E. Anderson. M.I.C.E. Anderson were the consultant. They loosely exist in Mott MacDonald these days. The contractor for the construction was Cleveland Bridge and Engineering Company. They existed up until weeks ago, and sadly they went into administration, and that was quite a big hit for the local economy up in the north of England. Construction cost at the time was £1.5 million, and when it opened, it was the longest suspension bridge in the UK at the time, and certainly one of the biggest post-war projects around. Again, nothing particularly striking about the bridge. It's a fairly standard suspension bridge. I don't know how many engineers are out there watching, but it's a symmetrical bridge. Foundations in the river on caissons, reinforced concrete towers, which are about 73 meters high. And then we've got the main spans and the side spans, 335 and 114 meters. And the whole suspended length is 615. So to put that into some context, Humber Bridge, they're about 1,400 meters long, longest bridge in the UK right now. So we're small in terms of bridges, but as I say, it was the longest at the time in the UK, and we still have the same challenges as other bridges around the country. Got a slightly unusual cable, main suspension cables, in the way they were constructed. And I've really put this in just for some detail if you want to look at the presentation afterwards, rather than talk about the detail of how the bridge is actually constructed. And as we're a naval town, very close to Plymouth, with a big dockyard just downriver, that puts the weight of the bridge into context. So we are around about 7,900 tons of suspended weight. That's the weight of the structure hanging from the main cable supported by the towers, which is equivalent roughly to a Type 45 destroyer. And again, I won't cover too much of the key characteristics, but I'll let you have a read through those and after the presentation, as well as these photos. Although I do like to put in some old construction photos from time to time. It's good to look at how the bridge was constructed, and it's also good to remind ourselves how far we've come in terms of health and safety. If you look at some of the working practices going on in some of these pictures, it's brilliant. I particularly like this one with the trusses. This is part of the steel truss being lifted from the river, and you can see the workmen there sat minding their own business, watching the world go by. Flat caps, no harness, no hard hats. You know, it's a fascinating world, and certainly construction has changed enormously since the 1950s. So I'll let you have a good look at those photos yourself in your own time. So really what we're here to talk about tonight is planning major projects. I'm going to focus on the resurfacing project, but really the principles I'm going to talk about in a few minutes apply to all our projects, almost regardless of the scale and size of them or duration. But like I say, we'll focus specifically on the resurfacing, which is our most recent project in 2021. We'll look at the project life cycle, just look at some of the project management, which is what you're really interested in terms of, particularly in terms of civil engineering. Look at some of the challenges faced, and hopefully there were some highlights and some successful parts of the project. But I thought in preparing for this, I should look at what a project is, because we often talk about projects, but what are they? What do they mean to you? What are they to me? And for me, this is how I define our projects. It's something that's not a routine business operation, and it's certainly separate from our normal everyday business activities. Normally, because we require funding, we'll need a very sound business case, and we'll need to be getting separate budgets or separate funding for those projects, and that's quite a key aspect for us. Our projects will often have well-defined timescales, certain lifespans, and definitely deadlines, like everybody else's projects. And more often than not, they will require additional resources. We're a very small team at the bridge, certainly the engineering team are, and we don't have all the skills and expertise necessary to deliver some of these projects. So that's often outsourced to experts, particularly design and other specialists. And it's also important to recognise that our projects aren't determined by value. You know, they're typically in the range of £10,000 to 7 million. Other projects can be more than that. But it doesn't mean because it's only £10,000, we don't have to go through the same business case or the same approvals processes. But as I said, I don't think these are unique to Tamar Crossings, and I imagine many of your projects are probably defined in very similar ways as well. So that's what I think defines my projects, and I thought, as I was presenting to professional project managers, I thought I'd better find out what you thought project management was. And this quote is taken directly from your website. At its most fundamental, project management is about people getting things done. And that was Dr. Martin Barnes, your president. It's quite a good description. I like it. It's succinct. It's to the point. It's not a buzzword in sight, which is good. And I guess the people getting the things done are you, the project managers. But I often cringe, to be honest. We often hear the term project manager bandied around, misused, overused even. And we look at things like Kevin MacLeod's Grand Designs, the apprentice on telly, and they get labelled project managers, and people quote, "I'm project managing this, I'm project managing that," whether that's catching and selling fish for Lord Sugar or spending hundreds of thousands of pounds on their own grand designs. They haven't got much knowledge or experience about the projects they're delivering, and it's often a recipe for disaster. And project management, as far as I'm concerned, requires some very detailed knowledge and expertise, and it's very much more than making a long to-do list. And it might sound a bit strange, but I really don't consider myself a project manager particularly. We're running projects all the time, and even though I'm often running multiple projects that are interlinked, and one project will affect another project, particularly timescales, I don't even think I consider myself a program manager. Tamar Crossings, as I said, is a bit of an unusual beast, and in my view at least, we are a client organisation. We sit somewhere weirdly in the middle of Cornwall and Plymouth City Council, and as a client organisation running projects, I often get tagged with the label client or client's representative or employer's representative, and we'll touch on that a little bit later when we talk about contracts and project management. But I guess simply put, I'm the one with the project, the budget, the purse strings, and often the deadline, and it's down to me to gather the right professional support services to complete the project. And it also means I'm often managing the project managers so that they're able to deliver a project or my project effectively within the budget and the agreed timescales. And that takes a slightly different approach for me than just being a project manager. However, having said project management, projects aren't routine business operations. Quite often, our projects develop out of routine business operations, particularly things like the bridge resurfacing works. One of the key things for us is the bridge inspections, the bridge maintenance, and carrying out those activities, the routine things we do every day of the week, every day of the year, year on year, we build up a picture about what's going on, and we identify defects, and we might go back to certain elements and repair and repair and repair, and that's not working. And before long, that becomes a project. And that was very much a case with the resurfacing project, which had a long gestation period, beginning in 2007, eventually completed in 2021. Project ran on and off for that 13 to 14 years. And essentially routine bridge inspections identified defects which were developing quickly and required more than just small interventions that required patch repairs. So it's important to recognise that, you know, particularly for us, like I say, our projects often develop out of the routine day-to-day work. So once we realised actually we're not keeping up with maintenance and we need to do something about the surfacing on the bridge back in 2007-8, we had to develop a strategy, and that was to maximise the life of the existing surfacing materials in simple terms. So that's making the most of what we've got in place. That means we're spending the least amount of money. We're not wasting resources, very important these days. And we were thinking about that back in 2007. So we developed a phased approach to resurfacing the bridge. We carried on inspecting and testing the existing materials, trying to determine what life was left, how long the existing materials might last. And then in 2011, we resurfaced the very worst area of the bridge, which was the Plymouth side span. And that allowed us to trial materials and processes for when the remainder of the bridge required resurfacing. And that was a really good process for us. And it allowed us to monitor the performance of the trial materials over a long period of time. And when we came to resurface the rest of the bridge, we were able to refine our material designs and specifications. And while that was happening over the number of years, we were able to consider stakeholders, risk, cost, sustainability, and the impact on users and impact on the bridge structure itself. By leaving the bridge deck in a more worn state, what effect does that have on the overall bridge performance? One of the reasons we don't jump in with both feet always to just, particularly say with the resurfacing, to resurface a whole bridge back in 2007. At that point, the surfacing material was only 7 years old, and it's very hard to justify going to the expense of resurfacing the entire bridge when not all of it needs doing. Our governance is really quite onerous, and we've got 2 masters to serve, and we sat in the middle of both of them, and they've both got slightly different processes, and we have to comply with both of them. Occasionally one says yes, one says no, and then we're stuck in the middle. But all of our projects have to be supported by a sound business case with cost benefit analysis, project program, and detailed budget requirements. All that has to be planned and presented when we go through our governance processes. Essentially, we propose things to our joint committee, they approve them, and then they have to go through Plymouth City Council and Cornwall Council, their cabinets and their full councils. So it's a pretty detailed process with some rigorous checking of budgets. And on top of that, in order just to deal with the procurement, we have to also go through Cornwall's Investment Capital Board, and that enables us to go out to tender to actually get contractors on board for the work. These 3 points here, 3 constraints, are key for us in managing projects, and it determines how we deliver our projects, and it can have a significant effect. And each of these constraints impacts on another, and so they can't be considered independently. So that's time, that's the duration of the project, the cost of it. That's not just the cost to us directly. We do try and assess the cost to the economy. That's quite hard to do. And also the likely delays and disruption, particularly for the resurfacing work, where there's going to be traffic management on the bridge and we're affecting people's journeys. In an ideal world, I'd love to close a bridge and resurface a bridge entirely in 2 months. It would take me very little time to do that compared to 5 or 6 months in the way we did it, but the cost would be quite high. Not the highest, but it would be quite high, but the delays and disruption will be unbearable. So that's not an option. And likewise, if we wanted to do the job to create the least delays and the least disruption for our users, it would take a very long time to complete, and it would cost an enormous amount of money. So it's a balance of all three of these constraints, and our challenge is to find the appropriate balance within those constraints, and that's often quite a tricky thing to do. And that most appropriate balance between the time, cost, and delays, that informs our approach to the engineering technical aspects of the project. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail about design specification. That could be another presentation in itself. Likewise with procurement, I'll touch on it in a minute. But I'm going to focus really on the contractual matters, because that's where project management comes into it for us, and the way in which we manage our contracts. But very briefly on the design, they're the things we need to consider when we're specifying our works. Standards, that's British standards, European standards, best practice even, industry expertise, what knowledge is out there, the risks associated with design and specification, budget, because we could have a cheap solution or a very expensive solution, the resources, what resources are available, how readily they're available, and also the knowledge that is available to us. So contractual matters and project management, that's what we're all really here interested in, and this is how we managed our contract, the resurfacing contract. But again, this isn't a unique thing for the resurfacing, and we use this form of contract and project management for most of our projects. Now, the new engineering contract is a contract that's been around for 30 years. It's still called the new engineering contract. even though it is that old, and it's currently in its 4th iteration now, NEC4, and that's just filtering through industry. People aren't quite familiar with it yet to be using it widely, but it's a standard suite of contracts, as I say, recognised and widely used throughout civil engineering and construction. And I do know of other industries that have adopted it because of the way the contract is formed. And it allows for a range of commercial options, and I won't go through those options, but they're called A to F, and we chose option A, which was a priced contract. When we went out to tender, we had a fixed price from a contractor. The NEC contract is it's designed to stimulate good project management, and that's what we're all about, I guess. That's what you're interested in, good project management. But it needs to be applied correctly. You need to understand the contract. Both parties need to understand the contract and understand how the contract is applied. And when that works, it does stimulate good project management. The contract's written in a very clear and simple style, written in plain English in a structure that's straightforward to use and straightforward to implement. And it really places collaboration, risk sharing and reward at the center of the project between all parties. And there's a line that gets bandied around, and if there's ever a little bit of falling out, or there is some conflict, everyone is quick to remind everybody that all parties have a duty to act in the spirit of mutual trust and cooperation, and that's a really important element of the contract and project management when using NEC. So interestingly as well, I found this on the APM website. First published in '93, as we said. It was pioneered by Dr. Martin Barnes, second mention of him tonight, your founding member of the APM, honorary fellow and also a past chairman. And also the NEC is approved further reading for the APM Body of Knowledge 6th edition. So I've given you a link there, which gives you access to your own website and a bit of an explanation about what is NEC, particularly NEC 3. In terms of project management, there are some key roles, key titles within the contract, and everybody has to understand these roles in order for project management to work using this form of contract. There we go, that title, employer, and that's why I sometimes get called the employer's representative, because it's not defined as a person, it's an individual. However, the latest version of NEC, NEC4, has changed that title from employer to client. So in future, when we use an NEC4 contract, I will become client representative once again. Project manager, key role, and they're a focal point within the contract, and it's their role to administer the project in accordance with the contract and perform their specific duties under the form of contract. Supervisor, and they can be an individual or a team, and they're responsible for managing the contractor's compliance with the works information. I'll explain a bit about the works information on the next slide. But it's interesting to note that occasionally we, as the engineering team at Tamar Bridge, act as supervisor on behalf of the project manager. So sometimes we are a client's representative as well as being the supervisor on site, and our own engineering team perform that role, and that helps keep some of the knowledge about the bridge and about the projects in-house, and we don't lose that to consultants or external organisations. And then of course the contractor, they're the person delivering the works. That can be the organisation or a team, and again they've got a responsibility to deliver the works in accordance with the works information. Now, the works information is something that we provide. We write that down, we specify it in a certain form, and we describe the works required by the contractor. And it's also important to note that we have to state any constraints on how that contractor provides the work, because that's really important when we're talking about the surfacing works. What can they do? How long can they work? What traffic management can they have? Are they allowed to close a bridge or not? And we have to define all of those constraints for them so that they can deliver the works within a defined time. The works information, as I say, also states when the works must be complete. It's pointless asking the contractor to turn up and they start the work without an end date, and they can take as long as they want. So we have to give them a completion date for the works. And at the time of tender, it's up to the contractor if they can meet that deadline or not. Now, the NEC program is a key part of the contract. It's a really significant document, and it's produced and owned by the contractor. And the project manager's role is to assess that program, make sure it meets the contractual requirements, and he can choose to accept that program or not. And once a program is accepted, that creates a really important benchmark, because all changes to the contract or delays are measured against the approved or the accepted program. And the accepted program is critical for a good project management under NEC. I have been on jobs previously, long time ago, where we've got to the end of a job without an approved program, and that creates some significant contractual mess when trying to settle final accounts and costs and the price of changes with contractors. So that's really important under the NEC, is to make sure there's an approved program, and it's contractor's role to update that program when a change occurs, and then again, that's up to the project manager to approve or otherwise. I did say I wouldn't touch on procurement too much. It's the bane of my life, frankly. It is difficult in the public sector environment. It's protracted, and it's difficult. I understand why we have it, I understand why we need it, and there are some very good reasons set out there why we need to comply with the public contract regulations. But it's hard work, and it takes time and it takes effort. One of the important things to note, though, about our procurement is that we adopted a competitive dialogue procurement process, which is a slightly unusual procurement process where you engage with contractors at an early stage. You can talk about the work you want. You can talk about the basics of the project, and as those dialogue sessions go on, the aim is to develop solutions with a range of contractors, with the aim of increasing value, maintaining market competition, because they know you're talking to a range of contractors, and also encouraging contractors to innovate, come up with some good ideas to work with the client to give them the solution they want. So that was a really good form of procurement for us. It doesn't happen all the time, and not all projects require it, because it is quite a difficult process to go through. But in certain circumstances, like the resurfacing, it is actually a very good process. So what was the resurfacing work then? We've talked a lot about it, but I haven't actually told you what it was. Well, essentially, it's lots of complex processes, all very weather dependent. We had to remove the existing surfacing material, shot blast the steel deck, paint the steel deck with a primer to protect the steel from corrosion, and then we apply waterproofing attack coat, which bonds the waterproofing to the surfacing, lay 2 layers of tarmac, and then apply white lines, road markings, and the illuminated studs. That all sounds pretty simple, but when you're doing it in a very process-driven way, every part of that process is weather dependent. The only part that isn't really is laying the second coat of tarmac. But other than that, it's all affected by weather. Some other practical considerations then when we talk about giving the contractor constraints, where he can work, where he can't work, when he can work. That again is developed by us, and again, coming back to these three constraints: balancing time, cost, and likely delays and disruption. And in order to give the contractor enough time, enough space to do the work, we have to balance the availability of traffic lanes and his work area. So there's areas of conflict there, particularly between engineering and our operations team, because the operations team are basically, interested in getting vehicles across the bridge, across the river, and there is sometimes a difference of opinion on what the best way to do that is. But with the resurfacing works, this is what we came up with some working areas for the contractor. In doing that, unfortunately, we lost our pedestrian cycle path on the south side of the bridge. So we had to run a minibus service. That created more hassle than anything else, I think. We're not a bus company. We're not used to running buses, and our contractor provided that service. But it's just one of the things we have to consider when we're working on the bridge. What happens to other users? So we don't have to think about just lorries, cars, buses, and where do they go? We have to think about the pedestrians and cyclists as well. And in order for them to cross, we had to provide an alternative means. Additionally, we had to talk about our project with a huge number of stakeholders. We are a busy crossing, 50,000 vehicles a day, there or thereabouts. We link the A38 trunk road network, and anything we do on the bridge has a significant impact on Highways England's network. As I say, the diversions aren't great. It's a tall point ferry or a 15th century stone bridge, which can't take HGVs, and a 15-mile diversion. So early in the project, stakeholder engagement was key, both in Plymouth City Council, Cornwall Council, with the local authorities there, Highways England, as well as the emergency services, because they need to use the bridge on a regular basis. A lot of ambulances travel from the Cornish side to the largest hospital in the area at Derriford in Plymouth. So we need to be talking to them, discussing with them how to cross the bridge and the impact the work will have on them. So it's not just it's not just what we do. We have a significant impact on those, as well as hauliers, local town council, and those sort of stakeholders. And then further considerations. How do we promote this? How do we get this information out to people? And website, social media, and webcam traffic updates were really key for us on this project. I can't think of another project we've done where we have had such a intense media campaign, and our communication manager took on that challenge. Lots of videos, lots of updates, and it was a battle. It was hard work to get the message out there and get people to understand why we're doing the work, when we were doing it, and so forth. Of course, we also had to manage incidents. Just because the roadworks happening didn't mean the breakdowns didn't occur, or we didn't have shed loads, or we didn't have road traffic accidents, other police incidents, or other network disruption. We are a diversion route from the A30, which runs to the north of us, and we need to liaise with the local authorities and the police in terms of managing those incidents, as well as the highways operations centre in Bristol and the local incident command in Plymouth. Additionally, we also had to provide light and heavy goods vehicle recovery. If we get a breakdown on the bridge, we can't wait for the RAC or the AA to turn up in 2 hours. We need that vehicle gone. We need it moved. And in order to do that, we had to provide our own breakdown recovery service to aid with that whole process. So that's a very sort of quick overview of how we managed our project. There were challenges, significant. There were some successes as well, I'm pleased to say. Well, I think there were successes. As I also already mentioned, we got significant negative press. There were delays on occasions of 40 to 50 minutes. I know that doesn't sound a lot if you live in London, Birmingham, Manchester. You're used to those delays on a regular basis. In the southwest, doesn't happen very often. So when commuters are suddenly being faced with these delays on a daily basis, it certainly gave us a challenge, and that was, part of our role to manage expectations, manage what people expected on a daily basis, and our communications manager, like I said, did a great job managing that through social media, and our local authorities and councillors. Weather was a challenge. As I said, all our processes were weather dependent, and we did have some really poor weather in June and a little bit of July, which had an impact. So we had to reschedule, replan some of the works. And of course, I couldn't really not mention these last two or three, COVID-19 and Brexit. I think they were probably the two biggest challenges out of everything. Part of the complaints we had was, why didn't you carry this work out last year when there was 30% levels of traffic on the road? And if I had a crystal ball and I could have planned, and I knew COVID was coming and I could have finished all my other work previous to that, I might have had a chance. But quite frankly, it's a ridiculous suggestion to think we can pull a project like £5 and a bit million surfacing job out of the hat and complete it during COVID was ridiculous. It had a significant impact on the work, and where people were travelling from, and how we carried the work out. And we also had to finish other projects which were delayed because of COVID, because of the first lockdown in 2020, and that had a consequence and a knock-on effect on the resurfacing work, which was delayed by 12 months. Brexit also had a surprising impact. We all know there's been problems with supply, resources, materials. One of the issues we had was getting our European workforce from Switzerland, the surfacing contractor, to the UK. There was no, under Brexit, there was no means for them to travel and work in the UK. They didn't fall under any of the visa schemes that were in place, and they fell through the cracks in the pavement. And that actually delayed the project by a further 3 months, from April to June, whilst we got work permits arranged for the European contractor to come over. So that was a significant hindrance. And then we also had the G7 summit, well publicised, and you do wonder, well, why does that affect us? Well, we were a prime target for protests. We had a very high police presence for weeks. Extinction Rebellion were threatening to close the bridge while we were trying to work on it, and that took quite a lot of close liaison with the local police, local authorities, and local resilience forums to manage our way through that. So yes, there were challenges, and they were significant, but there were successes as well. And I think, well, there they are. The correct technical solution, we believe it was used to resurface the bridge, should last for 20 to 25 years. And that should mean minimal disruption for users because of resurfacing works on the bridge, at least for the next, hopefully, 25 years. Bridge reopened to traffic 2 weeks ahead of schedule, despite the poor weather and some of the other challenges. We were due to finish at the end of October, and we finished in early to mid-October, say about two weeks ahead of the programme. Our original project budget was £6.5 million, and the outturn project cost is £5.5 million. So obviously within that 6.5, we had some contingency, some risk allocation. That didn't come to fruition. So we managed to save some significant money there. I also think social media was actually a success in the end, and we did win the hearts and minds of quite a number of people. And there were actually some people defending us regularly on on social media. So that was a success, I think. And it's weird to put COVID-19, Brexit, and G7 in the successes side of that slide. But to be honest, I think they were the challenges to overcome what they threw at us. and how our contractor managed them particularly was a success. I think that was down to the collaboration between all parties and what we're able to do with the contract and the project management. So on that, I'll wrap up. I realise that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour of our project, but we'd be happy to take any questions, and I think Julian or Robert will lead us through those. Thanks.
Perfect. Firstly, thank you, Richard, for giving up your time over the last 50 minutes to share about the project, outlining all the different areas, etc. I'm going to dive straight into the questions. So Catherine has posted a question saying, very complex project. What would you do differently in the future if you did it again?
Well, firstly, you wouldn't do it with a pandemic. Probably wouldn't do it directly after Brexit either, if I had the choice. But I think we would probably use potentially use a different form of the NEC contract. The form we chose to use was the option A, which is a fixed price contract. But I'd certainly consider one of the other forms of contract, potentially a target price contract, which would give the contractor more incentive. So there's a risk reward bias with that form of the contract. And if a contractor finishes early, saves money, then that is shared between both the client and the contractor. So it would incentivize them to maybe innovate more, finish the contract sooner, and that would benefit everybody, particularly our users as well. So yeah, definitely think about the form of contract and how that would work.
Excellent, thank you, Richard. I must admit, during your presentation, I actually tweeted your Tamar Bridge, and I'm waiting for a response. So I'm gonna test those social media skills that you said work so well. But yeah, thank you for that. I can see Owen's posted a question, and it probably touches on your answer from the last one. And Owen has asked, why was option A chosen on this scheme rather than option B, of qualities, BOQ?
We wanted cost certainty. At the time, going through the competitive dialogue process, the contractors were asked at every stage of that process, can you do it within our allocated budget? So our allocated budget of £6.5 million, that doesn't include that includes everything, the contractor's cost, the consultant's cost, design time, our time. So the project budget that's the absolute limit. We managed the outturn cost at £5 million, like I said, but we wanted cost certainty, and because our governance arrangements are so difficult, if we have to go back and ask for more money, ask for additional funding, that could have been a significant delay to the project. And we'd already had those significant delays because of the reasons we've talked about. So we wanted cost certainty, which is why we went for that option.
Excellent, thank you very much. If anyone has any additional questions, please feel free to post those on your control panel. Richard, you clearly covered every point because we've gone through the questions that have been submitted so far. I wonder if you wouldn't mind sharing about the wider team that you worked in. I know you mentioned Brexit was one of your challenges with some of the workforce coming from Europe. What was your wider team like? How many people were you working with in total?
So as I said, our engineering team directly at the bridge are quite small. So we don't have the capability to deliver these projects alone. So we've got a consultant on board who works with us to deliver design specification. They've been on board with this project for probably 10 years. They've got one of the leading experts in the UK on surfacing. So their knowledge and expertise on bridge surfacing is second to none. One of the things we had to get across to people as part of the project was explaining the complexities of resurfacing a bridge. It isn't a normal carriageway. It's not a normal tarmac. And that was a difficult thing to get across to people. So our consultant were key in developing that solution for us to last for 20-25 years. That's really important. We had a contractor on board who were Volker Laser. They were, again, expert in bridge resurfacing, particularly waterproofing. They've worked on lots of bridges around the country, lots of waterproofing projects. So they had a team of probably about 20 on site, which increased to probably about 35 or 40 once we had the surfacing expert. So the materials we use on the bridge can't be laid by anybody. There's probably only 1 or 2 contractors around the world who can lay the material we've got in the way it's laid. So again, getting those resources across from Europe during Brexit, during COVID-19 were difficult. And then we've got our project manager who we outsource as well, and that enables us to act as client. And again, these projects are quite complex, and our project manager is an approved NEC project manager. And as I sort of mentioned right at the start, to be a project manager, you need knowledge, you need experience, particularly of the contract you're using. And if you don't understand the contract, then that's really failure of the project manager and failure of the project at the outset, particularly with a contract like NEC.
Excellent, thank you, Richard. And I know you touched on NEC throughout the presentation. We actually did a webinar series only recently covering different areas of NEC. So if anyone needs any additional information, please go to APM YouTube, where you'll find actually a recording of tonight's event and those as well. Kerry has posted 2 quick questions, so I'll put those to you if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
Do you have framework suppliers or go to tender every time?
We've got 2 for our routine maintenance. We do have a couple of frameworks in place. They're essentially frameworks of 1 supplier. A lot of the stuff we do at the bridge is quite unique. Some of the access issues, some of the painting requirements. We need multidisciplinary contractors who are used to working in that sort of extreme environment, whether it's on ropes, painting experts, contractors who know about expansion joints, movement joints, those type of things. And also then we're doing a lot of fabrication, welding, metal work. So we've got those two sort of essentially single supplier frameworks. But on top of that, we go out on for particular projects like resurfacing. We go out to tender every time. And again, because a lot of what we do is quite specialist, there aren't generally many contractors available in the marketplace. I would say it's rare to have more than 3 or 4 contractors who submit tenders as part of our tender process, because a lot of what we do is quite a specialist.
Okay, perfect, thank you, Richard. And the second part of Kerry's question was, how long does the governance process take from submitting business case in the best case scenario?
How long's a piece of string? It can be. I would struggle to get a project from inception to completion to approval in 9 months, 12 months, there or thereabouts. And if it doesn't quite fall in line with how Plymouth City's cabinet and full councils work, then you have to wait a bit longer. They're not going to move a meeting for us. It just goes when it goes. And it's a little bit like the Investment Capital Board of Cornwall. They have set meetings. They meet, every 3 months or whatever it might be. And so, if we miss one, then we've got to wait for the next one. So it is quite a difficult process, and it's pretty onerous. And the key thing is we've got 2 masters, and they haven't always got the same views. Which throws up its own challenges.
I can imagine. Kerry, thank you for those 2 questions, and Owen before that. I'll take this opportunity to welcome back Julian, just to bring tonight's event to a close. But Richard, on behalf of the APM, I'd like to say thank you for everything you've given for this evening.
No worries, thanks, it's been a pleasure.
I'll echo those sentiments as well. Thank you very much, Richard, for a really interesting presentation. And as one of the ones who was stuck in the queues, I'll try and be a little bit more understanding in the future. But one question I would like to throw at, which struck me, you mentioned about the length of time it takes for inception to approval can be up to a year, I think you said. What happened if there was unplanned maintenance required?
Generally, we can deal with the unplanned with our frameworks. We did have a situation about 3 years ago where we found some serious defects on the support system, the cable support system on the bridge, and we had to replace 1,800 bolts. Now, I don't mean little bolts like this. I mean, bolts, big bolts. And there was an emergency joint committee meeting held for that because it was safety critical, risk of closing the bridge. But then we still had to fall in line with various government processes within the two authorities. It just meant because we had the emergency committee meeting, the emergency budget sort of approval from them, we could get on with the project. But we still had to go through a procurement process, and those procurement processes are quite fixed in terms of timelines, particularly if it's an ODU procurement process. I don't even know whether ODU processes exist anymore post-Brexit, but we're still following that, and there are some very fixed timeframes within those procurement processes. So even once you've got your internal approvals, we've got to comply with the procurement regulations and the timeframes set out within those rules. So all in all, it would still take 6 to 9 months at best to get most projects approved, even in emergency situation.
Okay, thank you for that. And
it's never
thank
really
you very
been tested more than that, I must say.
Well,
I'm pleased to say.
Hopefully it won't, but thank you very much for your presentation, and I hope everyone enjoyed that, and hope to see you in future events. And can I remind you once again that there is the post-event feedback that we are looking for. We do read it, and if you have any comments, we will look at them and see if we can improve, or if it's something you're happy with, we will try and repeat again. But thank you all for attending. Thank you, Richard, and thank you, Robert, for your sterling efforts in manning the computer tonight. Much appreciated.
No
So
problem.
on that note, I will thank you all and wish you a very good night.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. Good night.